Okay, so we'll begin as this is kind of more of a formal Buddhist topic. Some of you were here during the Cultivating Emotional Balance course, and we didn't do a lot of preliminary prayers or dedications, even though we could have. Here we are in the meditation hall at Kurukulla. But tonight we'll begin by setting our motivation and then doing the Refuge and Bodhichitta prayer, which is on page 7 of this white prayer book that you've got on your table. So we'll first just take a minute. We say that before any Buddhist practice, whether it's a meditation session or a class, or even our own personal study or service, it's really good to take a minute to just reflect on our motivation. So think about what brought you here tonight. It may be that you are experiencing maybe some difficulties in your life. You're kind of looking for more tools, more ideas of how to cope more skillfully with some of the things going on in your life. It may be that you're already a Buddhist student. You've heard about this idea of bodhichitta and the Bodhisattva Vows, and you'd like to learn more. It might be that you're a relatively new student and you're just looking to round out your understanding. Whatever it may be, just take a minute to reflect, and there's no right or wrong answer. There's so many different levels that we begin. But just really reach into that deepest level of aspiration and motivation. And then, because we're studying this topic that we say is from the altruistic level of motivation, of wishing that our spiritual practice is a benefit to others, try and set the motivation thinking, may my study of this topic, may my attendance here at this class be of benefit to others as well. I'm trying to increase my own understanding, but may it be of benefit to all living beings. So trying to generate that altruistic motivation. And then let's recite this verse at the top of page 7, and we'll recite it 3 times in English. To the Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest, to aid all may I become Buddha. In the Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest, to aid all may I become Buddha. To the Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest, to aid all may I become Buddha. So you see that motivation that we reflected on is just right there, very explicit in that verse. To aid all may I become Buddha, which is sort of the definition of bodhicitta, of this wish for enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. That's the foundation of the Bodhisattva Vows. So we'll backtrack. For some of you might not completely at all understand what I just said, so we will go back and talk about it a little bit. There might be some people of different kind of levels of background in the class. I imagine that's probably the case. So we'll spend some time tonight especially setting the context, just seeing where these Bodhisattva vows, these beautiful guidelines for our behavior, kind of fit into the Buddhist path as a whole, which I think will be good for all of us, whether we feel that we're, more or less an experienced student or not, whether we're a brand new student, but really kind of setting the context of where are we in the path with these Bodhisattva vows. one of the beautiful things about studying the Bodhisattva vows is I think that we can study them and benefit from learning about them kind of no matter where we are on the path. And I mentioned last night, some of you were here, we were having a class, and I said, this is one set of vows that we're allowed to study the commentaries before having taken the vows. Some Buddhist vows, you're only able to study them after the fact, which is a little unfair, because I think sometimes, in fact, I heard once, the monastic vows are ones that you're only allowed to study after you take them. And I heard once a story about this Western monk that got ordained by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in India, and then he found out what his vows are, and he's like, oh, well, forget that, I can't do that. Maybe apocryphal, but I think it was true, right? So that happens, but we're off the hook with the Bodhisattva vows, because we can study them, and I find that they're really beautiful to work with in our life and in our practice, even before we take them as a formal vow. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the difference between like promising and really kind of vowing to do these things, these beautiful kind of activities and behaviors, versus just kind of using them as guidelines for our life. But we can all do that, you know, so even if we don't feel ready quite to commit to this as a lifelong practice, that's one of the beautiful things about these vows. And they're so practical. I just love it, you know, because sometimes we think of like, oh, if you're Buddhist, you're supposed to be kind and nice to people. Okay, well, that's kind of vague. Okay, how do I do that? These are like so practical. It's like, oh, in this situation, do this. This situation, do that. Oh, and when you feel like you want to do that, you know, to get something for yourself, just don't do it. You know, it's great. It's like super specific, like 64 details about how to be nice to people, you know, which is like overcomes the vagueness and gives us a lot of really good, you know, kind of just detail about how to behave. So we'll discuss, we'll find, it's quite amazing, even though a lot of details about how we live have changed in the last 2,600 years, doesn't seem much about human nature has. So there might be some details about how we can or cannot do certain things that the Buddha talked about, but those things and those impulses and those, you know, disturbing emotions and things that we have, same thing that, you know, happened at the time of Lord Buddha. So that's kind of interesting. It's a little bit humbling maybe to realize that, you know, just like, oh wow, in the time of Lord Buddha in ancient India, they felt like doing the same kind of things that we feel like doing, you know, like pass the buck so that somebody else will take the blame for something you did. Wow, they did that too, you know. And then it's kind of embarrassing too, because you think about all of these things actually Lord Buddha talked about because somebody of his students did it. And we think about how embarrassing it is to like mess up in front of your teacher. And sometimes I look at these vows, and the monastic vows, same thing. And each one of those was the result of somebody coming to Lord Buddha and saying, hey, Joe did that. And Lord Buddha kind of going, oy vey, I can't believe they're doing that. We have to make a rule about that too? Like, are they not, you know, so it sort of makes me feel better about my own behavior, which is sometimes less than exemplary of like, they were doing all this crazy stuff right in front of Lord Buddha, so like, it doesn't make me feel quite as bad. So we'll look at all of that. It's interesting to look and talk, and we'll unpack, but let's set kind of the context first. And the first kind of part of the context is to talk about where do these fit within the context of what we call in Tibetan Buddhism the Lam Rim, or stages of the path teachings. How many of you are familiar with the Lam Rim? Have you studied the Lam Rim or stages of the path? Okay, a lot of you, some of you haven't, a little bit. Yeah, some of you haven't, some of you have. We'll kind of go over it a bit quickly, just because I wanted you kind of use it to set the context, and then in more of your study you'll be able to get into it more and more. And so there was a great Indian master called Lama Atisha who is responsible for spreading the Buddhist teachings in Tibet there was a second spreading of the teachings after a decline. And Lama Atisha was this great Indian master, and he went to Tibet to kind of revive the Buddha's teachings. And he brilliantly, I mean, he was a great scholar, had studied in monasteries for, decades and decades, was seen as one of the foremost Indian masters. And he consolidated, he realized that a lot of the texts had been destroyed in the Tibetan monasteries. People didn't really have a clue how to practice. And so he kind of consolidated all of the texts and all of the teachings of the Buddha into this very clear, very easy steps of how to practice, and composed a text that we still study called The Lamp of the Path to Enlightenment. And Lam Rim, the Tibetan word Lam Rim, just means path to enlightenment. And so there are many texts written on the basis of this sort of very systematic breakdown of this is what you have to do on the Buddhist path. Because the teachings of the Buddha, a lot of them were just conversations that the Buddha had with various people, right? So he would have a conversation, then he would have another conversation, he'd repeat a little bit what he said, he'd add on some more, then he'd have a conversation with somebody else. Those are called the sutras. So what Lama Atisha did was look through all of them and go, what did he keep talking about all the time? Let me pull it out and make it really systematic, kind of take from that narrative, right, the main points, and say, oh, he always talked about this, and this, and made this list that we call the topics of the Lam Rim. So it's really kind of awesome. In the time of Lama Atisha, the Tibetans were seen as these total barbarians by the Indian masters. Like they would just go to Tibet and they'd just be like, oh my God, these people, I don't even know if it's worth it teaching them. They're just completely like out of control. And that's actually this very same attitude the Tibetan Lamas had about Western people when they first started teaching them. I remember the kind of lineage master Lama Yeshe, who's the founder of the organization that Kurukulla, got so much criticism from the other Tibetans because he started teaching Westerners in the late 60s, and there were just these hippies that had come like overland. I mean, I can say that because I'm one of those people. Overland from Europe. I remember these two friends of mine showed up. I wasn't there at the time. I heard the story later. These two Italian guys, and they'd grown dreads, and they show up in loincloths with their dreads piled on top of their head, covered in ashes from the charnel ground, and it's like, oh my God, right? And so Lama Yeshe, the other Tibetans were like, what are you doing with these people? They're barbarians. And so Lama Yeshe chose to use the Lam Rim because it was sort of the barbarian's dharma, I guess. It was sort of like, okay, these people aren't smart. They haven't studied in the monastery for 50 years. You got to make it simple for these people. So Lama Yeshe's like, okay, we'll do it like that. So we kind of inherit that lineage of the Lam Rim teachings, which is what our teachers, thank goodness, didn't give up on us and started all those years ago and said, no, these people can understand the Buddha Dharma. So that was why they chose this lineage. In the teachings of the Lam Rim, they're divided into three levels, sometimes called three scopes or three levels of capacity or three levels of capability. So it's talking about, what are the aspirations of the people studying? We reflected a little bit on our aspiration at the very beginning, which we do at the beginning of teachings, but there's this idea of, the teachings that people are going to be given, the practices that they're going to be doing are appropriate to whatever their motivation is, what's their aspiration. And so Lama Atisha divided the teachings into three levels, and he said, depending on the aspiration, we share. At the upper level, you do all of them, but you might stop at a certain point depending on the level of your aspiration. At the advanced level, with this aspiration, you do all the practices, everything, you don't skip. But some of the practices you may stop. Like, for example, the initial scope is said to be a wish for an upper realm rebirth. And for those of you that might be new to Buddhism, there's an idea in Buddhism, most people are used to the idea of, Buddhism says we're reborn over and over and over again, right? So there's this idea of rebirth. Some people call it reincarnation. We usually call it rebirth in Buddhism. We're reborn over and over and over again. And we can be reborn in a variety of different kinds of realms of existence. For example, the two that we can see, that most human beings can see, are the human realm, like us, and the animal realm. But Buddhism says there's more than that. And there's realms that are characterized by extreme suffering experiences, and there's realms characterized by extreme pleasant experiences, even more sense pleasure than what we have now. And so the people at this level wish not to be reborn in realms characterized by extreme suffering. That's kind of the limit of their aspiration, is like, ooh, I don't want that. I've heard about those extreme suffering states. So my spiritual practice will be motivated and directed towards that goal, right? Not wanting to be reborn in one of those states. Fine, totally valid Buddhist motivation at the initial scope, right? Totally valid Buddhist motivation. Middling, we say the middling scope is the wish for liberation from cyclic existence. So cyclic existence is the name that we give to that process of being reborn over and over and over and over again. We say the force that causes us to be reborn is our karma and delusions. So karma, disturbing emotions, ignorance. Those of you who were around last weekend, I know a lot of you are coming back. That's what we were talking about all last weekend, wasn't it? Those forces that propel us into our next rebirth over and over and over again. So this is saying, you know what? Forget about just being free of the lower realms. I want to be free of that whole process. Wherever I'm reborn, as long as it's out of control and forced on me by my karma and my delusions, that sounds like bad news. And it is, you know. Like, I just want to get free of that whole process, that whole cycle. So that's the second level of motivation. That wish is known as renunciation. Some of you know I'm really into language, and you have already heard about some of the translations that I hate, because I think they're like so misleading. This is one I really hate, renunciation, because it makes us feel, you know, the English word renunciation, right, makes us think of like nuns in cold convents in the Middle Ages, eating bread and water and sleeping on like stone slabs with hair shirts, doesn't it? Wishing to get free of all of our suffering, that feels really different to me, right? So all renunciation is, it doesn't mean, oh, eating bread and water. It certainly doesn't mean shaving your head and putting on a weird outfit so airport security takes you 3 times as long. Trust me on this one. Doesn't mean any of that. It just means it's either super easy or super hard. There's never medium. You know, you either get like somebody from Taiwan who puts you into TSA pre-check, or you get strip search practically, and they bring out the sniffer dogs. It's never medium. Anyway, that's kind of personal. So the wish for liberation from cyclic existence. So this wish, understanding wherever I'm reborn, it's a setup, you know, for disappointment. It will only last temporarily, even if I get a realm, you know, characterized by all this sensory pleasure, like, we call them sometimes God realms or Deva realms. It's sort of, I think of the getting fed peeled grapes by the goddesses realm, that thing. But it's temporary, it's going to end. And then usually you've used up all your good karma experiencing all that pleasure that's just wasted, and then the next address is down, you know. So we realize that. We're like, wherever I'm reborn. So that wish is known as renunciation. Who made up that, you know? The Tibetan literally translates as definite emergence. right? The wish to definitely emerge from cyclic existence. And I think that's a lot better. I don't know what translator decided that that was renunciation, because renunciation to me still means bread and water and, hair shirts and things, but it's not. It's just that wish. So wishing to get free. And then the advanced scope, we say, it's not good enough for me to be free of all of that suffering. What about everybody else? Right? So this highest scope, the wish, is motivated by this altruistic feeling of, I don't want to just be free and leave everybody else suffering. I want to develop a capacity that will enable me to help others as well, perfectly, right? And I think we all have a compassionate wish to help others suffer less. We all have that naturally. But how much capacity do we have? Do you ever get frustrated? I do. That you feel that your compassion has so far outstripped your wisdom and your ability. Has anybody ever had that feeling? Is it just me? Okay. That you feel like, wow, I want to help so bad and I just don't have a clue what to do. Or you try and it makes it worse. That's even worse. I mean, being clueless is bad enough, but then you just try to help and it just messes things up more. So we say, with that motivation to be of benefit to beings, you think, how can I do that? Wow, I want to benefit beings, even to the point of freeing them from all their suffering forever. How do I do that? And then you realize only by becoming actually a Buddha can I do that. We say that fully enlightened beings, Buddhahood, and that's a long story, but the couple of sentence version of what the Buddha's qualities are, we say that a fully enlightened being has this incredible mental capacity that we call omniscient mind. So we say that a Buddha knows exactly the karma of beings, knows their delusions, knows exactly how to teach them and guide them perfectly. Okay, a Buddha isn't a savior. A Buddha can't just wave the magic wand and make it okay and clean up our karma. What's the proof of that? Like, we're still here. I don't know about y'all, but I'm still totally suffering from the effects of my negative karma. If a Buddhist is compassionate and not just like a sadist, and he had the capacity, we'd all be free. And then, like, let's go to the beach or Vermont or something, wherever you guys go. In California, we always say, let's go to the beach, but I guess that's not quite as pleasant at this time of year here. But, the Buddha guides us perfectly. The Buddha says exactly the right thing. A Buddha knowing exactly what your capacity is, what your mental state is. And it's really interesting to compare. I mean, sometimes this happens a lot. Like, you'll go to hear the Dalai Lama teach with your friends. What was it, a couple of years ago in the Beacon Theater in New York? A bunch of you guys went down there. And so the Dalai Lama is teaching to this big auditorium, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, 10,000 people or something. And then everybody goes out of there just going, oh my God. Like when he said that thing, he looked right at me and he knew exactly what was going on and he was speaking right to me. And then your friend is like, no, he wasn't. He said that for me, And then sometimes somebody will say something they heard him say and you're like, I didn't even hear that. Like, what? They're like, oh, that was amazing. When like for 20 minutes he went on and on about yada, yada, yada. And you're like, what were you smoking? Because I didn't hear that at all. That's kind of one of the qualities of enlightened beings is they give the teaching that's perfectly appropriate. And that happens to us all the time. Like any of you who've been to teachings with His Holiness, you might have had that experience. It's amazing. So it's about guidance. It's about being able to perfectly guide. There's another really cool thing that Buddhists can do. They can show up in any form that would be beneficial too. So that's handy. They're not limited to one body. We say that there's emanations that they can just manifest wherever a being is in need of guidance and has enough good karma to invoke the emanation. We say that the Buddha's power and sentient beings merit or virtue kind of meet in the middle. right? So that's the qualities of a Buddha. So understanding that, you just go, okay, if I really want to benefit beings, I have to get enlightened. That's the best way. I mean, it's not like you sit on your hands until you're enlightened and don't do anything, but we say, well, that's really the best way, all that capacity. And that wish is known as bodhichitta, Sanskrit vocabulary word, bodhichitta. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So we say that the Bodhisattva vows that we're going to be studying are within the practices of this level of the stages of the path. So it's very advanced and it's challenging, but it's coming out of that wish. And you'll see as we start to study, the whole context of these vows are coming from, and they support that path of becoming a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. So the whole reason for the Bodhisattva vows is to support that level of practice, of that advanced level, wishing to get enlightened for the benefit of all beings. Now, if we're wishing to get enlightened for the benefit of all beings, do we also want to be free from samsara and also want to be free of lower realms of existence? Sure, right? So that's why we say we practice all of them. We just don't stop there. Do we want to be free of lower realms? Yeah, sure. How much can you benefit beings if you're living in this state of like unremitting torture? Not much help. And do we also want to be free of just those forces of karma and delusion that force us to be reborn over and over? Yeah, sure. It's just about not stopping there and carrying on to this highest level of motivation, the wish to be fully enlightened for the benefit of all beings. So any questions about the three? Mary Jane?
Well, animals are in the hell realm.
No, animals are in the animal realm. That's not bad. No. As far as lower realms go, animal is pretty good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, as pets, they really help us a lot.
Yeah. But are they helped much? They help us, and that might be nice, and they might get a little bit of virtue from that, but how much motivation do they have? How much is it our attachment, Mary Jane? Yeah. Yeah, and, when we look at karma, we say that there's throwing karma that determines the rebirth, and then completing karma that determines all of the conditions of the rebirth. So a pampered house pet, I used to always use Queen Elizabeth's corgis, but I've heard she doesn't have that many anymore because she doesn't want to get new ones because she's so old. I don't know. I think she still has a couple. I think she'll always have corgis. Anyway, I always use that as an example of not such a great rebirth, because animals are still considered the lower realms, but it's not as bad as it can get. But within that, versus a street dog in India, I mean, I've seen dogs in India that do not have one hair on their bodies because their mange is so bad. Like, seriously, it's like, yeah, it's really, so huge difference. And still, we would say, and I'm a total animal rights activist, so I'm just saying this not to diss animals, which I love, but can they meditate? We say that one of the characteristics of the animal realm, they just don't have the intelligence to learn. So what can they actually do in that lifetime except enjoy being pampered, and that's great, and give us love, and that's cool. But in terms of progressing on a spiritual path, we would say an animal does not have the capacity to understand. When I lived in New Zealand, there was this little dog that would always come into the teachings with her owner, and then sometimes she'd sit on my lap throughout the entire teaching, and she got years and years worth of teachings, but she didn't understand. I mean, maybe she got a vibe out of it. That's great, imprints, whatever. But she never meditated. I mean, she was really good, and she was quiet during the whole thing, but not a lot of benefit apart from just this, like whenever she saw someone in robes, she ran up to them. That's pretty good. Nice imprint. But you know what I'm saying, like in terms of really being able to understand and practice, she couldn't do that. So that's said to be, and for all of the lower realms, there's definite drawbacks of all of them. So in terms of our spiritual life, being a human being is said to be best. Even though there's realms characterized by more extreme sensory pleasure, we don't want those. They're very distracting, right? You don't really want to practice if everything is like blissful. Who cares? It's said that the human realm is exactly the right kind of combination of suffering and opportunity, that it's perfect for somebody interested in spirituality. Yeah, good question. Anything else about the 3 levels? And some of you that are new, don't be shy to clarify the 3 levels. We good? All right. So let's look a little bit more at this bodhicitta. So the wish to attain full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And Lama Zopa, our teacher Lama Zopa, is always, really stresses these 2 aspects of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, by the way, the Sanskrit word bodhicitta, bodhi, comes from the same root as the word Buddha. And that root literally means awakening, right? So Buddha was a title that meant the awakened one, right? So Bodhi comes from that same root, that same kind of root word. So awakening. Chitta, sometimes we say heart or mind, because in Asian thought, the seat of consciousness was said to be at the heart chakra. In, kind of Western scientific thought, we kind of equate mind and brain, don't we? But the subtlest seat of consciousness is said to be heart. So chitta, sometimes you'll hear this, chitta translated as heart, sometimes as mind. So it's like awakening heart, awakening mind. But this is the definition. So it's a wish to attain full enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And Lama Zopa says, he always stresses that benefiting beings is the main part of the wish. And how you do it is by becoming a Buddha. He says you've got to have both. If it were just the wish to benefit beings alone, then let's open homeless shelters and soup kitchens, and which we do anyway. We do all of that stuff, but we'd feel like, well, that's the way to benefit, right? Just by doing what I can. And he said it's not just the wish to become a Buddha by itself either, because like, wow, they're so cool looking. Like, wouldn't that, wow, Some of them, they got all these arms and legs and heads, and they're said to be, some of these meditational deities are said to be like perpetually 16. And whenever I read that, I was going, 16 was not my best age. I was just kind of like pudgy and spotty. I think 24 was probably my peak. 16 definitely was not. But it's not just that either. Like, wouldn't it be cool to be a Buddha? It's because that's the means to be of benefit to others. So Lama Zopa often uses the analogy, and he says, like when we'll have a potluck tomorrow, and there's amazing food. People bring the most fabulous, if you've never been to one, you're in for a treat, right? People bring this fabulous food. And then at the end of the table is a pile of plates. So what do? We take a plate to serve ourselves food. The reason to have the plate is in order to get the food that we plan to eat. And so Lama Zopa says, it would be really dumb to grab a plate and go sit down with an empty plate. And he said, that's what it would be like to want to be a Buddha without wanting to benefit beings. The only reason to become a Buddha is to benefit beings, just like the only reason to get the plate is to serve yourself the food. So I love that analogy. It kind of makes it clear of like, well, that would be dumb, and it's just really about benefiting beings in the best possible way. And that's what the aspiration to be a Buddha. So that's the definition of bodhicitta. And we say there's 2 levels. The wish in the form of a prayer, which is just like, oh, wouldn't that be awesome? I would love to do that. And then engaging bodhicitta, the wish in the form of actions. So acting to benefit, engaging in the actions that will bring about that result of Buddhahood. And then in the scripture they say, it's the difference between planning a trip and buying the ticket and getting on the airplane. like the wishing or the aspiring is just, oh, wouldn't it be awesome to go to India? And you go out and buy the Lonely Planet travel guide and plan your trip and you're thinking about it. And this is like, I'm going to go onto the website and buy the ticket and go to the airport and get on the plane. So you're engaging. Because we say that actually to become a Buddha takes a lot of karma, causes and conditions. A lot of causes need to be created for that result of Buddhahood. It's not just about wishing it were so. Remember that thing, I think it was like, when was it, like 10 years ago, The Secret? Remember that thing? And you just like put out to the universe some aspiration. I was like, oh my God. Sorry. I really diss it, and I never even read the book. I just heard enough to know. So we say, okay, the aspiration is important and great and not the whole story, right? So it's not just sitting around wishing it would be so. You have to actually create the causes for that result in terms of karma, and we'll talk about that. Because a lot of the Bodhisattva vows are about how do we create the cause for the result of Buddhahood? Like very, very practical things that we can do to create those causes of Buddhahood. So this is more like the secret thing. And we need that initially, but we don't stop there. We go on towards engaging in those actions that will bring it about. Okay, so any questions about bodhicitta and the two levels? Don't be shy if it's just completely vague right now. Please do ask. Because this is all to set the context for everything that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the weekend. All right, I'm going to believe you. Oh, great. I knew there was something. I could just feel the energy out there. Yes.
When you're talking about aspiring, is it really, so there's no action at all with aspiring? It's just you with your prayers?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So one of the, this is a detail I hesitated to mention, but I will since the question came up. We said there's a wish in the form of a prayer, and then we have the aspiring with a promise. But we haven't yet engaged. So that's kind of the aspiration with a commitment to do it. Then the next step is the engaging. Okay, so yeah, so aspiring has those two levels, just praying, wishing, and then wishing with a commitment. Oh, I wish it will, and I'll never give up that wish. That's kind of what the wishing with the promise or commitment level is. I'll never give up that wish forever. But you're not quite engaging in those deeds. And we'll look at, in the Bodhisattva vows, there's two levels of vows. There's vows for the aspiring level, and then there's vows for the engaging level. There's 64 of these, so we're spending most of the weekend on the engaging Bodhisattva vows, but there are 8 of these, and we'll look at those before we go into the engaging ones. Yeah.
Service or volunteering, I don't know why. So I'm always calling this for aspiration level. But there are some people who come in doing total service and they just
Yeah, and we can, they say, and a lot of times here we go again with the airplanes, like last night, it's my karma. I have some obscuration. They changed the flight path like yesterday afternoon, just in time for my teachings. I swear this hasn't happened all day long. So, yeah, in ancient times, there would be 2 different ceremonies. We would take the aspiring vow and then practice with that for a while and then take the engaging vow. Nowadays, it's done more in the context of one ceremony, and you just decide what level you're at. And you're right, some people just go straight for it, and decide to actually take engaging bodhisattva vows. Some, I would say in Buddhism, some karmic imprint or something, that they just feel an attraction for that, and there's just no question, and they feel ready for that commitment. I mean, with students, I often try to say, it's a funny dance, like be cautious, don't just plunge into things, because people that often plunge in without really thinking it through, then they'll just give that up and plunge into something else next Tuesday. And sometimes people are so cautious about any kind of commitment or vow that they never do it, so it's sort of a middle ground here. And it's interesting, this friend of mine who I met through these Buddhist monastic gatherings that we have, his name's Bhikkhu Bodhi, and he's a Theravadan scholar, and he's actually, Wisdom Publications has published many volumes of the Pali Canon, translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And once we were talking, and he goes, I don't know why you Tibetan tradition people talk about vows all the time. He goes, it sounds so heavy. I vow to do this, so like you're going to burn in hell if you transgress or something. And he goes, actually, and I've forgotten what the Pali word he used, and he said, it translates more accurately as training guidelines. And I was like, wow, that's so much more spacious than vow. I still use the word vow. But he said, actually, the intent of it is guidelines for training your capacity and your ability. And as we'll see when we talk about the Bodhisattva's so-called vows, it's actually really hard to break them. So it's a nice attitude to use them as training guidelines and just say, okay, this is sort of the way of training my mind. I know I'm not going to be perfect at this. Of course, obviously, then I wouldn't even need this training guideline if I were going to be perfect right away. But you're right, some people choose to just take those on board, kind of right away. It's just an aspiration that just fits for them. I remember when I was in high school, coming across the Bodhisattva vow, according to the Zen tradition, which is like these 4 things, and I can't remember. Actually, Les might be able to remember. It's like, my delusions are numberless, I vow to overcome them. Sentient beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Buddhahood is, my delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to exhaust them. Buddhahood is unobtainable, I vow to attain it. What's the 4th one? Do you remember? There's something else is impossible, and we're going to do it. Anyway, and just this idea of the Bodhisattva, and I was so inspired by that. Like, I'm just this hippie teenager, and I was like, that's it. That thing. And I remember making a poster. I probably had like Peter Max Flower Power stickers on it, no doubt, and putting it like on my bedroom door, and I would read it before I go off to like high school, So yeah, sometimes that, it just sort of speaks to something in you of like, it's so noble and amazing, that wish. So yeah, there are some people, that it just sort of appeals right away. Yeah, why don't you go for it? Yeah.
Struggling with something intellectually.
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama always says, happiness for people. To me, happiness is a vague term, and it's usually an impermanent consequence of something else.
Yeah.
And in Buddhism, they never talk about power, an evolution. So it's like, if you're sick, you have no physical power, you're not happy. If you're intellectually stunted, you don't have intellectual power, you're unhappy. So I'm trying to reconcile the concept of the quest for power and happiness.
Right. I disagree with you. I think that there are people that, for example, even when they're sick, mentally find a place of acceptance and well-being and peace with that, and sometimes even transform it into the path. So I wouldn't 100% agree with you. I mean, it's for sure the more, and when we talk about the precious human rebirth, that has a lot of features, and a lot of qualities. And we say that if we're missing some of those qualities and abilities, we don't have the greatest opportunity necessarily. So we do say, obviously, like that the more kind of abilities that we have, and the more freedom that we have, and the more kind of capability that we have and freedoms, then the more we can practice. But it doesn't necessarily follow always, I think, in terms of that. But maybe when we get into the vows, it'll kind of help round out the answer to the question. Yeah, and you had some.
Well, made me think of this. So in the Theravada, they don't have the Bodhisattva, right?
They do. However, they say, there's 2 things that I've heard from 2 different lineages of Theravada. One is that they say that the Bodhisattva path, they definitely present a Bodhisattva path, but they say it's for, well, like one explanation is it's for those beings that have the destiny, like the historical Buddha, like the next Buddha, Maitreya Buddha, to be what we call a wheel-turning Buddha, like an enlightened being that will kind of re-teach the teachings after a degenerate age when the teachings have completely gone out of existence. Those are what are called wheel-turning Buddhas because they come in sort of these dark ages and get things going again. And so one teaching says only those beings really need to become fully enlightened wheel-turning Buddhas. For the rest of us, liberation is the only thing that's necessary or even possible. Then I've heard, I co-taught a class in June with one of my closest friends who's a monk from the Thai forest tradition, an American monk from the Thai forest tradition. We were asked to give this like interfaith, Theravada, Tibetan Buddhist weekend. It was like 4 days. We had so much fun. I laughed so hard. We decided we started this new lineage of Buddhism called the Mahayana. We had so much fun. It was amazing. Anyway, he was saying in Thailand is the only Theravadan country where there's an active Bodhisattva lineage that, like, some Thai forest masters are just known to have taken the Bodhisattva vow and be Bodhisattva practitioners, and some are individual liberation practitioners. And I didn't really know that, but he said Thailand is the only one of the traditional Theravada countries that he said both lineages are kind of happening in there. Because what I'd heard was it was just about who is going to become a wheel-turning Buddha. They're the only ones that really need to follow the Bodhisattva path because it takes a lot more merit to become a Buddha, and they need all that merit to kind of get the teachings going again. But in co-teaching with my friend, the teachings that we get in the Tibetan tradition about the qualities of a Buddha, there's not so much of a difference in that tradition between a being who's liberated from samsara and a being that's a Buddha. There's a difference, but it doesn't seem to be as big as it is emphasized in our tradition. So it's interesting. It's different teachings. Sometimes you'll hear in the Tibetan tradition, this is really wrong. Oh, they just don't care about beings, so they decided to become liberated. That's just wrong. I mean, I'm telling you right now, like, it's just absolutely a complete wrong view. If you don't think something is even possible for you, of course you're not going to try and do it. Why be a Buddha if you think only the wheel-turning Buddhas are the ones with that destiny and you're not one of those beings? Like, why would you try? So it's not about choosing. It's not about a lack of compassion, like, at all. And that's a wrong view that I think we need to take responsibility to kind of, cut whenever we hear it. Because, different Buddhist lineages were so isolated, and I don't think any of these Tibetan scholars that wrote things like that had ever met a practitioner from Thailand. I remember when I first started hanging out with the Thai forest tradition monks and nuns, talking to them about what the Tibetan tradition says about how they meditate on selflessness. And they're like, that's not how we meditate on selflessness at all. So sometimes I think because of the geographical separation, there were these entrenched kind of wrong views. And that's one of the beauties about living in North America, because we can meet and practice with and exchange ideas with, practitioners of all the different traditions and sort of overcome some of those wrong views. Yeah.
I feel like it's worth mentioning. Alicia also, having developed the Lam Rim, wasn't he also the one who came out and said that all the Buddhist teachings are essentially complementary regardless of which sect or tradition you might be in, that they're complementary, not contrary, so that regardless of what method you're choosing, you're essentially all the goals are the same?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's one of the qualities of the Lam Rim, is just showing that. And Lord Buddha he taught all of those goals on the other flip chart because he knew for some people, and I had an experience, just talking about this liberation versus enlightenment thing. I was teaching an introductory course in India a number of years ago at Tushita Retreat Center, which is where the Dalai Lama lives, and there were like maybe 60 or 70 they have these huge introductory classes, 10-day intro classes, and there was this guy in the class, And he'd been studying Buddhism from texts for a while, so he's always kind of challenging what I said because he'd read something different in some class. And I had to talk to him and just go, it's a little much. Can we talk during the break? Because like every word out of my mouth. And then at one point, I get to this flip chart page, right? We're like 2/3 of the way through. I'm teaching the Four Noble Truths, and I get to the path and the goals and so forth. And I give the definition of bodhicitta, and this guy stands up in the back of the room and goes, "You Mahayanists think that you're going to be able to liberate all sentient beings? You're nuts." Stomp, stomp, slam. Like seriously, he like slams out of the room. Meanwhile, there's a guy sitting up in the front row, another brand new student with tears running down his face. He's never heard anything more inspiring in his life. I always tell the story about him, and he actually just came to visit me in California. He was from Denmark, brand new student. He went back to Denmark to get a visa so he could stay in India and study. He just finished 3-year meditation retreat and came to see me and actually sat in on the course I did with the Theravadan monk. I'm so proud of him. Like for him, just hearing this is like, that's it. I've just figured out my life. Whereas the other guy's like stomp, stomp, slam. He made this big thing. His poor friend who he's traveling with really wanted to stay. He insists they go. They call the taxi. They have this big scene in front of the building. And meanwhile, I'm like, whatever. Like if I were a Buddha, I would have said to him before class, you look a little tired. Maybe you should just skip. Because all of these levels are appropriate to different people, and they might change, too. It's not like you're stuck at one level of aspiration your whole life, right? They evolve. And by the way, let's just go back to this before we move on. What is not on here in terms of aspiration? What level of aspiration isn't even on here? God, just wanting a better next Tuesday. Right? Like just kind of wanting more calm and like my crazy mind. And that's where most people come, and I'm still there. I mean, I'm totally just wanting more happiness in this life. Forget about future lives. Who knows? Whatever. Most of us are just wanting some kind of peace and tranquility, aren't we? That's not even considered a Buddhist motivation, y'all. Like, sorry. That's not even considered a valid Buddhist motivation, but it's where most of us are and stay for a long time. So we can't diss anybody from the Southern Buddhist school for, wanting liberation. That's already really high level of motivation, yeah.
One of the things that I often think about when dealing with, with bodhicitta and the aspiration to help all sentient beings is the fact that in order for me to be content, happy, in a complete equilibrium, everybody around me has to be in a complete equilibrium. I mean, that's just reality, whether I like it or not. If somebody is out of equilibrium around me, it's going to throw me off. I'm not going to be able to have that state of mind that I'm seeking. So ultimately, it's in my best interest, if I want that peace of mind, to help everybody as best as I possibly can. Because that's the world I want to live in too, when we're all doing that for each other. So I have to be the microcosm of the macrocosm I want to live in. But I do find it very helpful to kind of help me with my compassion in that regard too. Because sometimes I don't have the capacity to be like, I just want to help that person, but I do want my peace of mind.
Right.
So it helps me kind of, if I don't have the capacity to just be altruistic in the way that I'm thinking.
It's kind of the fake it till you make it. I mean, it would be nice if it were really all about their happiness. It's still mixed with your own wish for your own happiness, but we say in Buddhist teachings, it's going to be mixed with our own, wishes for ourselves for a really, really, really long time until a high level of realization. So if we can use that at least to broaden your view to think about others and not just be in this narrow thing, then I think it's great. It totally functions, And then they say, like, at high levels of realization, no kind of selfishness mixed in there about, like, my needs at all. But we just need to accept for an awful long time it's going to be a mixed bag for us. And we can't just beat ourselves up about that. Like, just go, well, at least it's a little bit that I'm tuning into others, you know, even if it's still sort of about, I want them to be, you know, not such a pain in the butt so that I'll have some peace of mind. But, you know, that's not bad. Yeah.
Philosophy at all?
A little bit, yeah.
Stoics, even though it's a Western philosophy, they have it in their practice.
Yeah.
To help other people.
Right.
And why would the Stoics have that as like a, they're coming out of the school of the Cynics. I mean, they're...
Yeah.
But it's very interesting.
So it's pretty pragmatic.
It makes logical sense.
Yeah.
It's very practical.
Yeah, good. All right, so bodhicitta with the 2 levels, and then let's look a little bit at different types of ethics. And then we'll take a little break, and then we'll look at the scriptural sources of the Bodhisattva Vows. Because whenever we teach something, it's always really important to kind of give what are the sources of what we're teaching. But first of all, when we talk about ethics, and some of you are used to the 6 perfections, the teaching of the 6 perfections. Anybody heard about the 6 perfections? Okay, some of you have been studying, or these 6 levels of practices, and one of them is the practice of ethics. And we say there's 3 different types of ethics. There's the ethic of restraining ourselves from non-virtue. And that's mostly what we think about when we think about ethics, isn't it? It's like not doing the bad stuff. So an example of that level of ethics would be avoiding the 10 non-virtues. So in Buddhism, we have 10 non-virtuous acts. It's not everything that's seen to be, you know, ethically questionable in Buddhism, but it's a pretty good list. And some of you were here last weekend. We talked a lot about those 10 non-virtues. Things like not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, and so on. And then the second kind of flavor of ethics is accumulating virtues. So this is about avoiding new negative karma. This is about accumulating good karma, right? So, for example, practicing the 6 perfections is a way that we accumulate virtue or good karma. And actually, those are the practices that create the causes for the enlightened body and mind of a Buddha, are practicing the 6 perfections. Remember, we said it's not like the secret thing that you just want to become a Buddha. You got to do the hard work of creating the causes. The causes of Buddhahood are the 6 perfections. And we say, anybody remember the 6 perfections? Come on, I'm going to quiz you. Yes. Yeah. Okay, and ethics. Yeah. So giving or generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort or enthusiasm for our spiritual practice, concentration, and wisdom. And we say the first kind of, sometimes they're divided into the first kind of 3.5, because enthusiasm we need for all of our practices. So that kind of goes both ways. We say the first 3.5 creates the enlightened bodies of a Buddha, so the form bodies of a Buddha, and then the concentration and wisdom ones, the 5th and 6th, creates the enlightened mind of a Buddha. So all of these 6 perfections are the karmic causes for Buddhahood. So accumulating virtue and then benefiting sentient beings is the third kind of type of ethics or type of morality. And interestingly enough, when we look at the Bodhisattva Vows, it's all 3 kinds of ethics are covered by the Bodhisattva Vows. We've got primary and secondary Bodhisattva Vows. Sometimes the commentators say all the primary Bodhisattva Vows come under restraining from non-virtue. The first 33 of the secondary vows are all involved with practicing the 6 perfections, and then the last 11 of the secondary vows are about benefiting beings. And we'll look at that in a lot more detail, but I just wanted to set, again, the context of the 3 kinds of ethics are all practiced within those Bodhisattva vows. And then just in terms of the three kinds of vows that we can take, we have another word, pratimoksha, which we usually translate as individual liberation. So that's one level of vows. Some of you may have taken lay vows, the 5 lay vows. That's a pratimoksha vow. That's an individual liberation vow. You may have taken vows to avoid killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxicants. Those are the 5 vows for lay people. Monastic vows are also considered pratimoksha or individual liberation vows. So all the different levels of vows that monks and nuns take are considered to be pratimoksha vows. And then there's the Bodhisattva vows, which we're going to be looking at this weekend. And then there's tantric vows, vows that you take for certain levels of Vajrayana tantric empowerments when you take with a lama, or certain vows. So this level of vow is mostly about refraining from non-virtue. It's mostly about protecting our own karma, right? Protecting our own karma. Bodhisattva vows is training our minds in that bodhichitta, in that wish to benefit others, and is mostly about our behavior to do with others. This level of vows is mostly about keeping what we call pure vision, a different perspective on things that we use for our Vajrayana practice, okay? So different kind of purposes of those 3 levels of vows. Yeah.
Things. Are they saved for when you're really practicing well and your teacher chooses to give it to you, or can you do tantric vows almost immediately?
Well, certain empowerments involve taking tantric vows, and it's said that in order to really be able to keep them at all well, or even have any idea what you're doing, you need really good, at least intellectual understandings of what we call the 3 principal aspects of the path, which would be renunciation, bodhicitta, and a view of emptiness. So you need to have studied those basics really, really well. Otherwise, it won't even make sense. Yeah. Some people jump right in. I did. I just was like, yeah, I mean, some of us, I didn't have a clue. I just kind of jumped right in, and some of us do. I think people are more cautious nowadays, which is good, but they say, like, study really well the Lam Rim, understand renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, and then you'll be able to practice Vajrayana.
And emptiness, and there's been tons of teachings and over. But the direct DPE, direct perception of emptiness, which is really where you get it, is something I'm not sure I've had, or maybe I've had glimpses, but...
Yeah, it's a very, very high level of realization.
So then I'm not ready for tantric vows?
I'm not saying you need a direct perception of emptiness, because almost nobody would be qualified to take tantric empowerment if that were a requirement. It's super high. But just intellectually understanding well. Otherwise, those tantric vows, they don't even make sense, that kind of practice of pure vision. Yeah. Let's take a break. Let's take, how about 8 minutes till 10 after 8? And then we'll come back and look at the scriptural sources of the Bodhisattva vows. Where do they come from? Is it something I just made up? No. Is it something the Dalai Lama? Not even that. They go way back to Lord Buddha, and we'll look at that before we start looking at the vows. There's always amazing snacks. I don't know if anybody's new here, but this place has the most amazing snacks. It is. You could gain a lot of weight. I have to not look at the cookies. I have to say there was one of those chocolates left over from last night that I had to have some point midway through the afternoon. I didn't have to, but there it was. There it was calling to me. It's like when there's Ghirardelli chocolate, what are you going to do? Hell no. Oh, am I off? Hell no. You can if you want. Yeah. But that chocolate, just water, I think. Thanks. Yeah. I think if there was a no chocolate vow, wow, that would be tough.
You probably wouldn't take it.
I don't think I could, if no chocolate were part of being a nun. No, I would have done it. It's important enough to me, but that would have been a hardship. Yeah, because all the other stuff that you give up were no longer, no longer anything that I really cared much about. But chocolate, definitely. Okay, great. Go ahead if you have got a question, yeah.
I think today when I had breakfast with my friend, she mentioned, when she told me to come see you, and I said, what's her background? And she said, did you start out with Michael Geshe Michael Roach? Was that the place where you were in Europe in the desert?
Yeah, I did long
How long
retreat
did you
in the
stay?
first.
Did you do 3 years with him?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Because I came out of that group and I'm just kind of, I'm staying, they changed the name, but there's been a lot of problems.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I won't go on. There's been a lot of criticism and stuff, so.
Yeah.
Did you leave, or you just sort of went on for teachings because you felt?
Well, I was already a student of Lama Zopa when I met him, and he actually taught in all of our FPMT centers in California in the 90s. So that's when I first met him. For about 5 years, he would come usually once or twice a year, and he would do all the ACI courses, the 18 courses of the
Now
ACI.
they're getting criticized,
Yeah, no, I know. It's very controversial. My attitude,
So I moved on to other teachers, but I'm not really, it's just funny, maybe I'm not working hard enough, but I'm with Alan Wallace, basically.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, he's
I just
great.
finished a week and I did a 2
Oh,
month
did
in
you?
the
Because
spring,
Marianne was at that retreat at Garrison. Was it
Is
Garrison?
Marianne here?
She's sitting right
I
behind.
was told to meet her.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
and I
yeah.
forgot because
She's
there were
sitting
99
right
people
there.
and I met a lot of people.
Right,
but I didn't
right,
meet her.
right.
I probably saw her.
Yeah, no, she just came back from that too. It was great.
I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm floundering, and I really liked his teachings. There were good basis and everything, but somehow teachers, they've come out of it, but I didn't feel my teacher was very experienced. Did you know Jesse Fallon at all? He was a student of Lama Root, and Lama Root was the one who started with us in Gloucester, but he couldn't stay, so he sent Jesse to start the center
I
and
don't know
teach.
that person. Yeah.
So he's very young.
Yeah.
So you've always been with FMPT?
Well, yeah. I started with FPMT when I started with Tibetan Buddhism.
I saw Lama's over once, but way years ago, he spoke at a church in Porter Square. And then I chose ACI mostly because it was brought to us in Gloucester, and then
Oh, okay,
it was a good place.
right,
But
yeah.
it's been a long haul.
Yeah. Well, for me, I'll just share with you, my attitude is to just be really grateful, because I just felt like, wow, those 18 courses of the ACI, they're just amazing courses. And, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know what's going on now. I just try and keep an attitude of being really grateful for what I got. And,
When did you know you wanted to be a monastic?
It was at the end of that 3-year retreat.
Really? Oh, not
is
before.
when I decided,
I just love the learnings. I want to be a better person. And I'm having difficulty with giving. And I do one-to-one.
Yeah.
But some of the people are out there with organizations, and they're driving medicines for people, or getting food for the poor. And I haven't committed. I tried one, and then they let me go, and that really hurt, because maybe that's what stopped me. And then I did another one, and I was doing hospice.
Like
with
different
dementia.
volunteer work.
And in the 6th week, the woman said she would talk to me. She was interviewing people, and she said, "You can't finish."
Oh.
She said somebody said something, and then I found that somebody who doesn't really like me.
Oh.
I met months later. She said, "Oh, I'm working there." And maybe she went around and then asked if they knew me, because we were from the same area.
Oh, okay.
And she might have badmouthed. See, I'm getting
that's
very
a
paranoid, and I
shame.
love the
That's a
hospice.
shame,
It went so well. They had so many different people.
Sometimes
And I
it
lived
really.
with my parents. I did with my father, with my mother.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes a while to get a good fit
No,
with
I'm
the
still at
volunteer
it.
work. Yeah.
Alan is like the Dalai Lama. He's always friendly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of abuse in ACI. I don't know if you felt it.
Mm.
And I've read the articles, and when I read this guy's article, I go, that's me. And I wasn't with Michael, but I was with a group here. And they never let go. You make a mistake, but they don't forgive.
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he's. Yeah, I don't think he's recording. That's a shame. Yeah, it's disappointing when you get. Yeah, no, it's hard when you have that kind of experience. It can be really
But you love what you do. I
discouraging.
can see it. You really know it somehow.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to be able to teach. I really do love doing it. Yeah, yeah. But a lot of what I learned came from Geshe Michael. I mean, really, those 18 courses I feel so
Well, my mother was an automatic. I
grateful.
mean, she was a teacher, and then she didn't retire at 65, kept teaching, and then consulting, and then at 75 she retired. Then she was volunteering at the Y for little primary kids, and she taught every Sunday, even though she was a regular teacher. She'd teach every Sunday at the synagogue. I was brought up Jewish.
Yeah,
But she loved it, you know, and I like my teaching. I like what I'm doing, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess I'm not doing enough service.
Mm. Well,
Sort of
don't give
resting.
up. Don't give up.
No,
You
no,
know,
I'm
like,
resting, but this is the way I
yeah.
rest. But you got to incorporate it in your life. You can't just know all the stuff.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's
So-
true. But it sometimes does take a while to kind of find the right fit, and maybe with the right organization, like to find what you want to be doing, and then to find the right organization that you want to do it with. I mean, it takes a while.
Well, I read a T-shirt, The Lamp to Enlightenment, and I somehow was glancing at it in the bookstore, and then I went and told somebody. He said, "Oh, that's great," and it is a great book.
Yeah,
And nobody
so
told me to read it, so
clear.
I was kind of angry because they were using Geshe Michaels a lot.
Yeah.
And I recommended the Tibetan book, The Living and Dying, and they looked at me like I'm a spy.
Oh,
Just use his stuff. And every time we had a
yeah.
library, we could put other things in. And
Yeah.
then the teacher said to me, and by the way, I said, what? He says, read it again.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was beautiful. It's
Yeah.
just so well
It's
done.
so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for
Good.
listening.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi. Hi. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
This I feel kind of embarrassed to even ask about,
Oh.
but I am hung up on this animal thing, being an animal lover.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, annually here, and I know at other places, people do the lobster liberation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, if we're practicing on any of these levels, where we want to benefit sentient beings, then are we not called upon to, if an animal is suffering, let that animal suffer less? Or
Oh, absolutely. Oh, for sure. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and then the other thing is, I'm not so sure that there aren't times when the dog or any animal isn't accumulating merit, because I see animals who are unusual, and
Yeah.
more of these things keep showing up on the internet all the time.
Right. Right. Right.
They're not just like they have these reactions like with babies. And so
Yeah.
the baby's not
Yeah.
going to feed them. The
Right.
baby is really not going to contribute to their comfort, and they pretty much know who's
Yeah.
going to feed them.
Yeah.
So they do things to help small
Right.
children.
Right.
And who's actually nothing for them.
Yeah.
So there has to be, and I've been reading works of the naturalist Cy Montgomery, and the one that I'm reading, or almost finished with now, is that she came to the Boston Aquarium to study octopuses, which is the plural.
Yeah.
And she came and she named the books The Consciousness of an Octopus. And so she's definitely saying that she sees animals as having a certain amount of consciousness. And who thinks when they see a squid, in the ocean,
Right.
this animal has consciousness.
Yeah.
And she studies them, and they do amazing things. They interact with humans in
Yeah.
amazing ways,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they show preferences. So I just wanted to throw that up.
Yeah, well, no, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, I definitely, and Buddhism would say that animals definitely have consciousness. It's just about, can they understand and study and practice
No.
spiritual teachings? That's kind of, yeah, 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 yeah.
So so is there hope that when they die, though, they even if they're still born as animals, they can be that corgi on Queen's lap or something? I mean,
Yeah, and that's complicated, and that really gets into karma, and that's kind of, I don't want to give you a superficial answer because it's quite complicated, like
well,
what
here in
determines
Massachusetts,
rebirth.
when we vote in the beginning of November, we have a chance to vote on lessening the cruelty of animals.
Oh, great. Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we really have to, definitely we have to do that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
What about the animals
good. They're really good. They're good. They're very good. That's so virtuous. It's really virtuous. Yeah. No, I'm not
They're not
saying,
meditating, but
I'm just saying creating the cause for a precious human rebirth, difficult when you're a dog. Even if you're a virtuous cancer sniffing, bomb detecting, heroic lassie. But just in terms of like creating all the specific causes for a human rebirth, hard. Yeah, that's hard. That's it. I love animals, you guys. Like, you can't imagine. Look at my website. It's full of animal liberation. Trust me. Love animals. Okay. I wasn't trying to diss animals by what I said. Let's carry on. All right. So what I want to do is, actually, I will do the source of the vows, and then I've got a little booklet of the vows. So this is the source of the Bodhisattva vows. If you're not interested in this level of detail, don't worry about it. I just know that some people are really into this kind of stuff, so don't panic. You're not going to get the pop quiz on the sources of the vows. But I always think it's really interesting. I mean, I love this kind of stuff, and I think it's really important to, understand that these come from the teaching of the Buddha. So the lineage of vows that we practice in the Tibetan tradition comes from, we mentioned Lama Atisha, this Indian master that sort of revived Buddhism in Tibet. He went to Indonesia to study with a great Indonesian master, and he received all of the lineages of the bodhichitta teachings from this Indonesian master called Serlingpa. In fact, you can go in Indonesia to the ruins of the monastery where Lama Atisha studied with Serlingpa. So this was the lineage that he took to Tibet, including the lineage of Bodhisattva Vows that he took to Tibet. So those are the ones practiced in the Tibetan tradition. In the Chinese Mahayana tradition, there's also Bodhisattva Vows that come from a different lineage and different scriptural sources. Very, very similar, right? But when you study those, so don't be confused. We're talking before the break about this wonderful opportunity that we have to study with different traditions. It's wonderful, and if you don't understand, you can get very confused. So if you read a list of, Bodhisattva vows in the Chinese temple after doing this class this weekend, and then you just go, wait, no, you're wrong, you're missing some. No, it's a different scriptural source in a different lineage. So you'll see a lot of overlap. Those vows in the Chinese Mahayana tradition come from a sutra called the Brahmanet Sutra. And there's different bodhisattva vows for monastics and lay people. In the Tibetan tradition, the bodhisattva vows are just the bodhisattva vows, and whether you're a monastic or a lay person, if you have them, they're the same. In the Chinese tradition, they're different. So I just mentioned this because there are these differences in terms of the lineage of the vows, and ours come from Lama Atisha and, from his Indonesian master, Master Serlingpa. So we have 18 root and 46 secondary vows. So the root vows, number 5 through 17, come from a sutra, Lord Buddha's words, called the Akashagarbha Sutra, which means the Sutra of the Essence of Space. I love that. I haven't read it, but it sounds great, doesn't it? Sutra of the Essence of Space. So that's the scriptural source of root vows 5 through 17. Root vow number 18 comes from another sutra called the Sutra of Skillful Means. And then there's a text by Master Asanga called the Bodhisattva Levels. And Master Asanga is another Indian master, predated Lama Atisha, but after the time of Lord Buddha. I think about 350 CE was the time of Master Asanga. And so he wrote a text called the Bodhisattva Levels, where he drew from a sutra called the Avatamsaka Sutra, root vows 1 through 4. Okay? In the Bodhisattva Levels, Master Asanga said, here's the first 4 root vows, and you guys just figure out the rest from reading the sutras. So fortunately, Master Shantideva, the same author of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life that some of you may be familiar with and may have studied, did that hard work for us. And in one of his books called The Compendium of Advice, Shiksa Samuchaya, he delineated all 18 root vows. So what he did was, he was studying Bodhisattva levels by Master Asanga. He read about the 4 root vows, and then Master Asanga said, hey, you guys, read the sutras and pull out the other ones. So thank God he went to the Akashagarbha Sutra and the Sutra of Skillful Means and did that. And so he laid out all 18 root vows in the Compendium of Advice. And then there was another text called the 20 Verses on Vows by a master called Master Chandragomin, where he lays out all 46 secondary bodhisattva vows. And the 46 secondary bodhisattva vows are described in chapter 2 of the bodhisattva levels, but not delineated as like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're sort of described in a more narrative way. So Master Chandragomin went to this text and then delineated the 46 secondary vows. So those of you that are into details like I am, I think that's like super cool to see where they all come from. Master Asanga, in his Bodhisattva levels, said, and some commentators say that really those first 4 of the root vows, you know, if you practice with those, you're covering a lot of the bases. But then Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of our tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, says, no, you need all the details of the 64 vows. You know, so he says, looking at the first 4, they're super important, and we'll see. But he says you need all of the details of all 64. So these are the scriptural sources. Any questions from those of you who are really into the minutia? Where does all this stuff? But don't worry about it. Like I said, you know, if you're into that, that's cool. But if not, and then the information that I'm going to be giving you and the commentaries that I've studied with my teachers are 2 commentaries. One's called The Highway for Bodhisattvas, and that's actually short. I'll give you the longer version because it's kind of a cool title that we sort of shorten into Highway for Bodhisattvas. An explanation of Bodhisattva's ethical discipline, the main path to enlightenment, otherwise known as the Highway for Bodhisattvas. Jangchub Sempe Tsultram Ki Ramshe Jangchub Shunklam by Lama Tsongkhapa. And his dates are 1357 through 1419. And he's the founder of the Gelugpa lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the main lineage that we study here at Kurukulla Center. And so he wrote this great commentary on the Bodhisattva vows. And then there's another text by an early 18th century Tibetan master called Geshe Tsewang Samdrup, called The String of Shining Jewels. And so he mentions Lama Tsongkhapa's text and then, you know, provides some clarification of some of the fine points. So that's where all the information that I'm going to be transmitting to you guys this weekend comes from those 2 texts on the basis of all of those sutras. So are you ready? Yeah. I have heard, and unless it's changed recently, I've heard this has not been translated into English. I have seen an English translation of this one. But as far as I know, unless it's happened recently, when I was studying this, I had to study with Tibetan masters that were giving me the explanation. There wasn't an English translation, but that I may not be current. It may be that somebody's translated it recently.
How much is translated, percentage, rough ballpark estimate of all the stuff you've studied? Is it 10%?
Oh boy, goof. Well, one thing is it's changing all the time. I mean, when I first started studying, like not much, and it's really, really changing a lot, but I couldn't even give anywhere near an accurate kind of estimate. But a lot is still just in Tibetan. You know, there's so many texts that haven't been translated to any Western languages at all. Yeah.
Jason Camp is so important, and he's done the long rim. Why wouldn't they have done that all these years not to do the highway?
Well, how many translators are there around? Who's doing? I mean, there's just this incredible project through Wisdom Publications, the Asian, what's it called? The Tibetan Classics Institute. Is that the name of it? That they're really trying. They have to support the translator. They need somebody who's, it's complicated, and there's so many priorities, right? So, yeah.
Bhikkhu Bodhi, the one you mentioned, or Bhikkhu Tanisaro, who does 18 hours a day.
Yeah, Tanisaro
And then
Bhikkhu.
the Pali Canon,
Yeah.
both of them.
Yeah. Tanisaro Bhikkhu's translations are also just brilliant. Really, really great translations. I don't know. Yeah. Let's carry on with the Bodhisattva Vows. We're opening up many cans of worms. So here's a booklet, and so you can follow along. These are yours to keep, and so you can highlight things, make notes, whatever you'd like to do. I think what we'll do for the rest of this evening is just look at the Aspiring Bodhisattva Vows and then call it a night, because I think that's enough information to be getting on with. And then what we'll do is start with the root vows tomorrow morning, the root engaging vows, because this is, again, so far all been background to understand the vows. So let's look on it's page 5, the first page with printing on it of the Bodhisattva Vows. So we'll look at just the wishing vows. And there's 2 sections of the wishing vows. And the first section is how to guard the vows from degenerating in this life. And the second is how to maintain and enhance your practice in future lives. And this is an interesting point. We say when we take the Bodhisattva vows, we don't lose the vows at death of this life. We have them forever, right? Now, the Pratimoksha vows, my monastic vows, I'm only a nun as long as my karma for this rebirth lasts. And then when I die, I lose my monastic vows. That's one of the 3 ways of losing your monastic vows is dying. But that's not true for the Bodhisattva vows. You have them in future lifetimes too. So the question sometimes comes, what if I had them and I didn't know about it? Am I breaking them? No, because in order to break them completely and lose them, you have to be conscious that you have them. And so if you are reborn with them because you took them in a past life, you can't break them until you realize that you've had them and probably take them over again, and then you can break them. But you have to, part of breaking them is just knowing that you're breaking them, and if you didn't have them before. So guess what, you guys? You might already have Bodhisattva vows from a past life. Cool, huh? I know, right? And maybe that's why the one student had tears running down his face in the front row, and the other one was like, stomp, stomp, slam. I mean, something was going on there, because the same words were coming out of my mouth and totally different reactions. And so it's interesting to think, hey, do I even have these from past lives? So that's why the aspiring vows are divided into not to degenerate in this life, and even to be able to really keep them purely. And one of the practices, a lot of Tibetan lamas, when they know that they're passing away, and our teacher Lama Yeshe did this when he was passing away, a lot of times the very last thing they do in this life is renew their vows so that they die with their vows pure and freshly taken. There's ways that we can renew our vows. And so a lot of Tibetan lamas on their deathbed, and this happened with Lama Yeshe too, Lama Zopa guided him through these practices so that at the time of death he'd go into the next rebirth with his vows clean, purified, fresh, So this is a practice that a lot of lamas do for that reason, because we take them from life to life. So it's way more serious than marriage. I'll say, we hem and haw and try and figure out if we're going to get married to somebody. That's just this life, or less, mostly. Anyway. This is a lot more important than that. What?
Your vows would disintegrate upon your death. The Bodhisattva vows don't.
Not my Bodhisattva vow, my monastic
Oh,
vows.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think I just answered.
So
that includes monks as well as nuns.
Yeah,
not
yeah,
just
yeah.
monastic.
That's
vows.
right.
Oh, okay.
And your lay vows. Any of you have taken the 5 lay vows? You lose those at death too. So any of the pratimoksha vows, you lose at death. The bodhisattva and tantric vows, you got them forever. Yeah, it is. So, first, how to guard the vows from degenerating in this life. To develop inspiration, contemplate the advantages. So in order to keep inspired about our bodhisattva practice, thinking about the advantages, and there's a whole long list of advantages you can read on your own. We won't go through all of these, but it's said that bodhicitta mind, that mind wishing for enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, is such a powerful, virtuous mind. That's why it has all of these advantages. And for those of you who were here last weekend, I always think about, we studied karma, and we studied the 4 components of a complete karmic action. So this will be a little quiz for you guys who were here last weekend. The rest of you are off the hook. But let's look at the 4 components of a complete karmic action. So we've got the object was the first component. So what's the object in our bodhicitta motivation? All sentient beings. Doesn't get much more all-encompassing than that, does it? Right? So what's our motivation? Free them from all suffering forever and any possibility of any future suffering. G, pretty virtuous motivation. So the second component, the aspiration or the motivation, also to free them from all suffering together. What's the action? Becoming a Buddha to do it. It's hard, you guys. Full disclosure, I probably should have said that. Becoming fully enlightened, it's not easy. Lots of causes and conditions. It's not like, the secret thing. It's hard. Becoming a Buddha, and then what's the completion? Freeing them. Guess what, you guys? We have just designed the most powerful, positive karmic action possible. Isn't that awesome? So that's why it's so powerful that all of these benefits, even just wishing it, okay, you haven't become a Buddha and done it yet, but even the aspiration, even it's an incomplete karma because you haven't actually become a Buddha and freed them all yet. But that's why it's so incredibly powerful. Isn't that cool? So knowing the 4 components of a complete karmic action helps you guys figure out what's so special about bodhicitta motivation. So all of these things, just because of all of the virtue. And then the second point of how to guard the vows from degenerating, to strengthen one's bodhicitta, contemplated and recite the prayer 3 times a day and 3 times at night. Because we're not supposed to give up bodhicitta. Once you've taken on bodhicitta, it's said to be very heavy negative karma to give it up. So we remember, and then there's a beautiful verse here on page 6 that we can say. And I think there's one in the back of this booklet too. Yeah, here it is on page 18. And so it's a verse that you can say, and then also a prayer to generate bodhicitta by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So any of those you can use in your practice. Good to recite them 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening with your daily practice. And that's one of our aspiring bodhisattva vows, is actually to remind ourselves by saying a verse. Now, the verse that we did at the beginning of class combines both refuge and bodhicitta, and if you've taken refuge, one of your commitments is to take refuge 3 times in the morning and 3 times at night. So with that verse that we did at the beginning of class, you've accomplished both things, right? But some of these more extensive verses are also nice. Don't give up bodhicitta because of the mischievous deeds of sentient beings. So this means you've taken on this vow to be of benefit to all sentient beings, and then somebody's a total pain. right? And you're just like, oh, I am just fed up. There's a great story about Lord Buddha's one of his main disciples was Shariputra, foremost in wisdom. And there was this story about Shariputra's past life. He was sort of cast in the Mahayana sutras as the representative of the individual liberation track. Like in the Heart Sutra, it's this dialogue between Shariputra and the Bodhisattva of compassion. So he's kind of taking the role of the individual liberation guy. So kind of in that vein, there's a story that in a past life he was a great bodhisattva. And then this demon manifested as a Brahmin. So this demon took the form of a Brahmin and said, who had his hand cut off. And he said, give me your hand. You know, you're supposed to be a great bodhisattva. Look, my hand was amputated, but they can sew on somebody else's hand. So if you're a great bodhisattva, give me a hand. So Shariputra didn't even hesitate. He was such a great bodhisattva. He sliced off his right hand and then handed it to the Brahmin with his left hand. And any of you who have traveled in India, you don't hand anything to anybody with your left hand because you cannot find toilet paper in India. So guess what you do with your left hand? So it's seen as like completely disgusting. You just do not hand anybody anything with your left hand. So of course Shariputra has to hand his right hand to the demon with his left hand because that's the only hand he has left. And then the demon masquerading as a Brahmin says, oh, God, that's disgusting, and throws his hand down on the ground and stomps off. And then Shariputra's like, oh, forget it. These sentient beings, you can't help them at all. I've had it. Right? As one probably would after you amputated your own hand to offer. You know, so that's the story, maybe metaphorical, whatever. But that's why we're not supposed to give up, even no matter how beings behave. You know, we're not supposed to give up our bodhicitta no matter what. Yeah?
Can we take a break? Can we take a break? Like if you feel like you're not... From your Bodhisattva vows until because sometimes you get in a situation where you feel you're not skillful enough yet and you have to just I just have to, you know, I love you, or I love you, I will see you to the end of time, you know, but right now, I just have to like figure it out first.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll be with you in my next lifetime.
Well, we don't have to take a break from our Bodhisattva vows to do that. Luckily, we're not like ditching our Bodhisattva vows. If we feel, in fact, there's a beautiful chapter in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life in the Enthusiasm chapter. Master Shantideva talks about these 4 powers that we need to bring into our Bodhisattva life. And the first one is the power of aspiration. The second one is the power of steadfastness. The third one is the power of joy. And the fourth one is the power of rest or relinquishment. And so in that chapter, he talks about when we've done a lot to benefit beings. We're maxed out, we're overwhelmed, we're burned out. There is a danger we're just going to give up completely. He goes, take a break. You know, so that's actually directly from Master Shantideva. So it's one of the powers that supports our bodhisattva activities. So it's not taking a break from our bodhisattva activity. It's actually something that we do to be sustainable for it. And one of the other things that we do is, you know, evaluate our wisdom of when can we help and when can we not. And one of the things that we sometimes the wisest thing to do is either just wait, the person isn't ready, or we don't know how to help, or it's unsafe for us. And in some of the thought transformation texts, they say, you know, don't wade into a dangerous situation just because you've taken bodhisattva vows and put yourself at risk. You know, so there are all of these sort of caveats to our bodhisattva activity. Lama Yeshe used to talk about idiot compassion. And that was a lot of the ways that we can just do it without that wisdom. And I think what you're saying is, yeah, sometimes the situation, the person, it's all overwhelming. It's not sustainable or not safe or not doable, or we don't have the wisdom. Yeah, then we're just like, I still really care. We're not giving up our care for beings, and we're not like throwing in the towel. We're just saying, for that situation right now, I just need to back off. So yeah, that's. And yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And for me, I find that that level of frustration actually is a great impetus for my practice. For me, that level of compassion, frustration, even though it kind of sucks, it's actually great. Because that's when you could just go, wow, if I had the wisdom. Right? Because that's when your compassion has sort of outstripped your wisdom and you don't have a clue anymore. And that's when I think, to be quite honest, that's what put my butt in long retreat, is I was so frustrated at how much I cared and how I messed up right and left or just didn't have a clue, and I couldn't stand it. And I was like, I need to go into long retreat to develop some wisdom. So I think that frustration can be a real good frustration and a real motivator for our practice, when you feel that way. But only if you realize, hey, I can still progress. If you just kind of get discouraged and go into despair because you don't know what to do. But if that not knowing what to do makes you realize, hey, if I keep practicing, my wisdom keeps increasing, my capacity keeps increasing, I will. And maybe in a future life for that person. There was somebody in this life who actually died before I felt like I could really help that person. And when I was in long retreat, I would think of that person and we had a strong karmic connection. I go, I didn't know enough in this life to help you, but I'm doing this, that when we meet up again in future lives, hopefully I'll have some capability, to be able to help you. So I think it can be a really beneficial kind of frustration. Yeah. I thought you needed a break. I was like, sorry, too literal. I was a little bit too literal. Okay. So just not giving it up like altogether. But yeah, for sure, taking a break. And then the last one, working to accumulate the two collections of merit and wisdom. And this goes back to the different types of ethics accumulating virtues. So these are the two kinds of virtue, merit and wisdom. And so merit by making offerings to the poor, to the three jewels, and anything that you do to benefit others, to serve others. Wisdom by contemplating emptiness, and this will help strengthen your bodhichitta. Any questions about these first four? Yeah.
Model that you use, because you can't really have a complete karma until all sentient beings are liberated, right? Because
But I guess my point was, even though it's an incomplete one, just to have the object, the aspiration, the motivation for the action being so all-encompassing, even that makes it so powerful, right? Right? Completing it for sure, like unbelievable, mind-blowing virtue in actually becoming a Buddha and pulling it off. But even before that, because of all the components of even the aspiration are so powerful, that's why even the thought is said to be so virtuous. And Master Shantideva also says, if your bodhicitta motivation could take form, the whole universe wouldn't even be big enough to hold it. And that's just that wish. Like, how cool is that? And then to do anything at all to try and enact it through our actions. So that's why the benefits, because you might read this list and you just go, well, that's kind of over the top, but that's because it's so incredibly virtuous. Yeah, Doug.
Like the story of Avalokiteshvara, right? The arms and...
Yeah, that's right.
First, the arms, that was that aspiration, right?
That's right. And it's metaphorical. It's like all those 1,000 arms are like so many different ways of helping beings, and then the eye in the palm of each hand, looking at the, and we will get there. I mean, we're so limited now, but that's the amazing thing when you think about what's possible, and we're getting there step by step, and it's like, how cool is that? When we're a Buddha, there won't be any limitation at all. There won't be any of this, oh, I don't know what to do. There won't be, it'll be just so limitless. So it's like so amazing, even just to have, even to be drawn to that, or just go, oh, because sometimes, to be honest, I think, I have the wish for the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit. It's like pre-wishing bodhicitta. It's kind of like, I might not even really have that, because they say actually to have uncontrived bodhicitta, meaning you're not trying to work yourself up into it, like you really have that as your motivation, that's a super high level of realization. I think we start with pre-wishing bodhicitta of like, wouldn't that be cool to wish that? Like, it's so noble. We have some sort of admiration for that noble wish. And I think that's where a lot of us start. I think that's fine.
I just meant, like, even if there are, but we're still not liberated, right? So if the karmic, like, the result was to do that, like, there isn't a being anywhere that has completed that karma, right? Because
that's why we all need to become Buddhas, because we say different beings have specific karmic connections to us. That's why we can't just say, oh, I don't need to do that because Shakyamuni became a Buddha, so he can take care of everybody. I mean, one of the reasons why we say we all have to generate that aspiration and try and become enlightened is because of the specific, karmic connections that we have with others. But yeah, you're right, it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe it hasn't, I'm the only one left unenlightened. I mean, I don't know, that's possible. Thanks, guys, for showing up, pretending to be students to keep me out of trouble this weekend. Very helpful. Okay. So let's just finish off these last four. How to maintain and enhance your practice in future lives. Abandon the four negative dharmas or negative actions, knowingly confusing one's abbot, guru, or other holy beings with lies. And I love this example, such as changing the subject when your guru asks you to do something, or not telling your guru of your negative actions because you're afraid of them scolding you. Yeah, just try lying to your guru. See how that works out for you. But that's, just so non-virtuous, right? To try and kind of deceive your teacher. Your teacher's only job is to help you and guide you, and then you're not even being honest with them about what's going on. I mean, for one, it's just stupid. And it's like super non-virtuous. I mean, just try and create the cause not to have spiritual teachers by deceiving them. You've just shot yourself in the foot with that one. And then the second one, discouraging others from practicing virtuous actions. So we can do this pretty easily. Sometimes we disrespect other people. Like, you've just done a 10-day retreat and somebody comes up to you really excited and says, oh, I'm going to do a day-long silent day at Kurukulla. And you're like, well, yeah, but it's not like 10 days. Like, they're really excited. It's what they can do. It's like they're new or something, so we have to be really careful not to be patronizing about other people's virtue and to really encourage whatever it is that they're doing, even if it seems kind of pathetic to you or like not that big of a deal. For them it is, right? So being encouraging with whatever virtue somebody is going to take on. The third one, and some of you are familiar with this in Master Shantideva, abusing a bodhisattva out of anger. So this is like somebody who's devoted all of their, actions of body, speech, and mind to benefiting others, and you get angry and yell at them. It would be like yelling at His Holiness the Dalai Lama, like somebody of that level. And then the question naturally comes, but who knows who's a bodhisattva? So just don't abuse anybody, because you have no idea. We say that bodhisattvas manifest in so many different ways to benefit. We have no idea unless we have clairvoyance who's a bodhisattva or not. So it's better just to not be abusive and angry at anybody, because it's really negative karma. I mean, can you imagine? Sometimes you hear about, you know, the Communist Party and the things they say about His Holiness, and it's just like literally turns my stomach. It's like, oh my God. And then you think about the karma of people that say those things, you know, or criticize, right? And this is somebody who's just devoting so much energy to benefiting others. So, you know, to kind of generate some sort of a negative view towards a person like that. And then the last one, putting on an air of having a selfless thought but having ulterior motives other than the pure wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So like pretending to be a great scholar. Sometimes you see spiritual people do this, pretending to be really like subdued and holy and walking around so people would admire them and think that they're holy beings or something. So it's sort of like you're putting on airs so people would, you know, will admire you. It's not really out of any kind of motivation of wishing to benefit them. You're just kind of like wanting people to go, oh, wow. You know, even in the texts on long retreat, they say, if you go up into the cave in the mountains in Tibet, and your main motivation of being up there and eating nettles and sleeping on the cold slab is so all the people down in the village think that you're some like holy yogi, right? So must happen, even for an example like that. They just say, you know, always check your motivation. Is it really about benefiting others? And it's not going to be perfect, but it's just checking and looking at hypocrisy, right? When you're doing actions that seem beneficial, but it's really not your motivation. And then the four positive ones that oppose those: abandon deliberately lying to any sentient being, even for the sake of humor. This is really hard for me, right? Like they say, even in jest. I'm like, oh no, I think I break this one all the time, or even at the cost of your life. And then don't discriminate among sentient beings. Try to help all of them, right, without discrimination. Abandon criticizing bodhisattvas. And then take upon yourself the responsibility to establish all beings in the Mahayana path by encouraging them, rejoicing in their virtues, and cultivating love and compassion in all your actions. So these are great guidelines, aren't they? And so these are the aspiring bodhisattva training guidelines. You know, let's use that word. So we can take these on board. And I think they're really kind of wonderful, sweet practices that we can do. One thing I find really helpful is to work with them, maybe take one of them and just keep it sort of alive in my mind and really be checking my behavior and see how I'm doing with that, and kind of try and train my mind with sort of one at a time. And then I get used to that one. It becomes more second nature. And that's how we can really work with these guidelines. So any questions about those? Yeah, Miriam.
Question about the one about not telling your guru about negative action.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you get angry and it's a negative action, but I'm not necessarily going upstairs and telling Geshe all the time, like, look, I got angry today.
Yeah. I mean, you can't do it like every time you have a negativity, but this is more about trying to conceal it when you have the opportunity. Like you're going through a hard time, or you've done something that you feel like would really be good to confess, and then you see Geshe-la and you have an appointment and he's like, how's it going? And you're like, oh, it's all so great, and I'm doing this practice and that and that and that and that. And you're not actually, you know, maybe there is something on your conscience that would be good to confess and you don't, you know. But yeah, it doesn't mean every single thing, because we have our purification practice for that. But it's more about concealment in sort of a hypocritical way is the point of that one. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
I think just hearing you discuss this makes me realize how incredibly difficult and how much work is involved to really truly attain it. I mean, I do see the potential and I feel the potential.
Right.
But it's really difficult to purely feel that in your heart.
Yeah. And you know, they're meant to be challenging. If they were easy, we wouldn't even have to delineate them. So we'll see that. And when we go over the engaging Bodhisattva vows, Again, it's hard to break them, and we'll look at what we have to do to break them, so we shouldn't feel so daunted. But they are meant to be challenging. I mean, it's not easy. If being a bodhisattva was easy, we wouldn't even have to take a vow and really train our minds and try and generate that. So yeah, it's interesting. Even for this level, you're like, woo, wow, okay, I really need to, kind of pay attention to that. But also taking it slowly, little by little, and just training your mind gradually and not expecting a lot of huge leaps or something right off the bat, too. Sometimes we kind of, we learn about something, we even learn about Buddhahood, and then we immediately feel bad that we're not a Buddha yet. Like we just got some new concept. Like, it's such a drag. It's like, oh, I was just kind of okay about being a flawed human being and practicing some self-compassion, and then I learned I'm really supposed to be a Buddha. Then you're like, wah, wah, well, I've failed already at that. But it's not that. It's just kind of really realizing, wow, how cool that I have these guidelines that I can train in and really, kind of try to start developing those qualities. Yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Told us after he gave us the vows that the only one that we really had to worry about was the first root vow.
Okay, that's great.
That's all he said.
Okay, you can go home by 10:15 tomorrow morning then. Yeah, and I think he's emphasizing how important it is. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. All right. Anything else? So let's dedicate, and we've got some dedication verses on page 57 of the white prayer book. And we'll do the verse at the bottom of page 57 and then the one at the top of page 58. And so let's take a minute before we recite the verse to just reflect on what we've talked about tonight. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I've heard him say, even hearing the definition of bodhicitta is this incredible purification for your mind. So even just hearing that definition of what bodhicitta is and then generating a sense of admiration and respect for that, so much virtue. So even in what we've done in the 2 hours tonight, we've already generated so much virtue, so let's dedicate it towards our spiritual goals. Through this virtue, may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every being without exception in that state. Precious, supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, so thank you all, and we'll carry on tomorrow morning. We'll start looking at the engaging Bodhisattva vows and just discuss them one by one. After we talk about them, we'll talk about how do we break them, how do we renew them, kind of how do we practice with them in a number of different ways. So get a good night's sleep, and we'll just carry on with bodhicitta tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. Just quick notes about tomorrow. We'll be starting at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and there is a potluck. We break around 12:30. I think we broke last week. Yeah. But we do ask that people bring something to share for the potluck, and it should be no meat. It's a vegetarian potluck. No garlic, no radishes. What else is it, Jennifer?
Onions.
You can have onions, just no garlic. And we don't have access to the kitchen, so it can't be something that can be heated up. So like finger sandwiches, some dips, salad.